Greetings, fellow explorers of the unexplained. Join us at Paranormal M as we uncover the secrets lurking beyond our comprehension. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for a journey into the extraordinary. Shadow Arm. Many years ago I lived in an old house. We had many spooky encounters there. This is the brief story of one such encounter. One night I awoke sometime in the wee hours of the dark bedroom. I saw movement on my right. I turned and I saw the dark silhouette of an arm. It was sticking straight up from the bed. The hand was bent at the wrist, dangling, with fingers fanned out and limp. The arm and hand was slowly waving back and forth. I assumed it was my wife, perhaps dreaming. I watched, somewhat disturbed at the strange behavior and motion. Reached my hand out to gently grab her arm to wake her up, and to my surprise there was only air. The silhouette faded away. Startled and frightened, I called out her name. She sleepily answered me, and I felt the covers in her arm were both completely underneath. It took me quite a while to get back to sleep. Another time my wife woke up and looked over to see the silhouette of me sitting up in bed next to her. She asked me what I was doing, waking me up pretty groggily to respond to her. When she heard my voice come from the bed instead of head level of the sitting figure, she was similarly startled and frightened. Quite a few things happened in that house. Haunted Former Hotel. This is a story about an old house in the rural part of central Massachusetts. It was a huge old house that had originally been half of a hotel. The other half was nearby. For some reason it was split in half and the halves moved apart. That always perplexed me. It was a huge 3-story Victorian structure with wide porches. How and why the building was split was never explained to me. The house was owned by some friends of my parents. They would host parties with lots of people, and the woman would play the piano and sing. There were lots of kids there, and we would run around inside and outside while the adults socialized. My memories of the house are vague. This was more than 40 years ago. I do remember that the house was huge, and had way more rooms than a family that lived there could possibly use. Up on the 3rd floor there were several hotel rooms with doors, largely unchanged since it was an operating hotel. The family that lived there openly talked about the house being haunted. I was fascinated by their stories as a child. Odd things would happen, such as repeatedly finding the telephone receiver out of the cradle and sitting on the table next to the phone. Light bulbs would go missing, apparently unscrewed from the socket and spirited away. The one anecdote that left the deepest impression on me was the one of the mother of the family that they told us that happened to her. One afternoon she was vacuuming one of the rooms on the 3rd floor. She turned around and was startled to see a man standing in the room, motionless and staring at her. She described him as a man in a gray suit wearing wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't say a word, just stood, staring at her. Caught off guard and flustered by the man's sudden appearance, she said the first thing that came to mind. "Do you like a cup of coffee?" He simply disappeared before her eyes. I never understood why someone would offer a cup of coffee to an apparition, but my mother said that the woman explained it as she was aware that the house had an apparent presence, that she felt it was benevolent. She wanted the presence to feel welcome. It found me again, and I shot it. A little bit more information. A few people said that a different gun might help, so I got a Glock because reliability was a recurring topic. I also got that gun and a magazine blessed by a priest because many others said religion would help. I didn't force him to, he was all for it and called it a personal crusade. I also got a personalized grip with some scripture on it, put a cross on the slide and a magazine. I also kept a Bible and a rosary just for my car. So me and my buddy were on our way home from a party at my mother's house at around 1:32ish. I went down the same direction I went before. Oh yeah, I wasn't alone this time either. Anyway, we were just driving and joking around like any other night. And once we got to a certain point, there was a heavy fog, much like before. So obviously, I slowed down a bit. We drove normally for a bit after that, much less conversation because of the fog. Then the turns started again. My buddy, who we're going to call DJ, mentioned the turns, and then I mentioned the story that he laughed at me about before. Never believed after that. He was pretty serious, and we didn't joke around anymore. We went up an incredibly steep hill that just kept going up there, where turns both sharp and wide, but we kept going upwards the entire time, at least 20 minutes. About 15 minutes into the climb, DJ started to pray. We're both religious. I'd handed him the rosary I kept in the car, and we took out the Bible I keep there too. After that, we stopped moving up and the road flattened out. After going straight for a bit, there was pretty much another very tight turn. Felt the hair stand up all over my body and drew the Glock from where I kept it. DJ saw and drew his as well. As we round the corner, I slow down even more, barely crawling forward. The corner ends and that thing is there, in the road, crouched, just like before. DJ says something, but I don't know what. I just stopped the car. We're farther back than where it was the first time. This thing is just barely visible at the edge of the fog. I lean out my window and level my gun. DJ does the same, and except he opened his door and rested his gun on that. I wait for something to happen. I don't know what I was waiting for, but I didn't fire. We sit like that for maybe 2 or 3 minutes until DJ says, "The hell are we doing here, bro? Let's get the fuck out of here." He shuts his door, but keeps his gun outside the car and leveled. Get back in, put the car in reverse, and as soon as I do, that thing stands up. It didn't do it the same way as before. It was instant. There wasn't anything in between crouched and standing, like a video skipping frames. I pressed the gas and slowly moved forward, and it disappeared into the fog. DJ relaxes, pulls his gun inside, and lets out a kind of nervous chuckle. Back up more and turn the car around. When we get all the way around, the creature's in front of us again, closer than it was before, still facing away from us. Not gonna lie, we might have screamed like little girls, but it didn't move when we did, and I put the car back in reverse and gunned it backwards till it disappeared back into the fog. This time, DJ is screaming for me to get us the hell out of there. I say that I'm doing everything I can. After going backwards a bit, I bring the car to a stop, getting ready to turn around again. But I can hear DJ scream, and I look up. This thing is definitely facing us now, and it's coming at us, full tilt. Its mouth was open but making no noise. Its arms were spread out like it was going to try to grab the hood of the car. I lean out, just randomly pull the trigger, and it fired. I dump the whole mag, not bothering to do much in the way of aiming, and I see at least 2 holes open in its chest. It slams forward onto the pavement and crawls underneath the car. I look into the rear and I see it running. DJ leans out and tries to fire, but he doesn't. I gun it forward and just speed off. We both notice that something is making sparks out of the back of the car, but don't stop to check it. Keep driving and end up going back down the incline we came up before about 5 minutes before. We're suddenly back on the road we were originally driving before the fog rolled in. The fog slowly dissipates over the next mile or so. Once the fog is gone, we drive for a little longer, then pull over and see what that thing knocked my muffler loose. It's dragging on the pavement. I attached some zip ties to keep it off the ground, then we left and went home. Silent the whole time. gripping steel till we walked in the door. I don't know what to do now. I just figured you guys might. At least somebody believes me now, I guess. Like, before, I'll answer your questions as best I can, but I think I hear the bottle calling my name for now. Ghost light on the wall. I wanted to share with you something I experienced when I was living in an apartment a few years ago. I'm sure this place was haunted. Many weird things happened, and I tried to find all kinds of rational explanations before I couldn't find any. I won't make a list of everything that happened, but many were common paranormal stuff. What I mean by common is, for instance, feelings of being watched, things moving, footsteps, noises, and, well, no one's there. Already pretty scary, but we've all read these kind of stories before. The weird thing is what I want to talk about today. I've loved paranormal stories for years, and I read thousands of them, but I never heard or read anything that could compare to what I lived. In my bedroom, there was sometimes light on the wall, really close to the ceiling, a wall just behind my bed. It was like a small part of the wall was being lit by some light, but there was no source. It wasn't a reflection of outside lamps or the moon through the window or curtains, or something in my room. It was like the light was in the wall. It's really hard to explain. It looked like a rectangle, and the light was a very pale, phosphorescent white. The first days we moved in, I noticed it. Thought it was the little lights we put on the walls or ceiling for children that previous owners forgot. The wall looked very normal. I showed my mom one night and she just brushed it off. The weirdest part was when it wasn't very night. Or rather that it wasn't every night. It was sometimes 2 or 3 times in a row and then nothing for a week and then again. I remember being so scared of it that I wouldn't dare looking up while lying in bed. Usually, once I turned down the lights, it would appear after maybe 5 minutes and stay for hours. When I woke up in the night, it was usually gone. One day I decided to cover it up with a poster, and that shit moved just next to it. Did you ever experience something similar? I've never had a clue on what it was. There wasn't anything on the wall or in the room. I checked many times. I don't have any picture. It happened years ago, and phones didn't really make good photos at that time. Also, I was denying a little bit of everything that was happening in this place because of how scared I was. I really need help. I'm now a 14-year-old male, and I have some big problems with ghosts, demons, or ancestors, I don't know. Since I was 4, I saw creatures which seemed to be like shadows. I also can hear them whisper, but I don't really know what they're saying. I also have the feeling that I know them like my parents, but I wasn't able to really speak to them. I also have cats. One already died, but 2 of them are still alive, and they can also see them. I know this because they try to attack or scare them. But it never was an issue when all of a sudden they started to hurt me. Usually just 1 or 2 cuts, but sometimes I had wounds which really hurt. To make it even more strange, after I got a wound, something bad happens in my area. Like an illness, or even worse, like death. For example, I've got a big cut on my belly, and the next day, aunt or a friend died. Or another, I've got a small cut on my arm, and on the next day I broke my finger. I've even got more examples. Sometimes they'd stand in groups when I see them. Sometimes they're alone. They look like regular humans, but without any face or anything else, just the shape or form of a shadow. They're following me everywhere, and while I'm writing this, they're watching me. I also try to get a photo from them, but it always failed, so I have to draw it. I'll upload it as soon as possible. I have another thing which is strange. Sometimes I can remember things that happened in the past, but I never ever heard of these things after. I remembered things like I'd always be searching if it was true, and it always was. For example, I can still remember the screams of dying soldiers and the loud explosions. I still have the picture in the front of my eye. I've never been more creeped out in my life than last night. Locational context. I live on a farm on the side of a mountain in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia's interior. No cell service, neighbors are beyond shouting distance, and very your own lifestyle out here. Your trailer's at the top of this property next to a barn, surrounded 360 degrees with forest, except for a little road up here. The mountain, named Mount Ida, has a long history with the Aboriginal people in my area. I've been told stories of the mountain since I was a kid. Basically, the summary of every story is people are banished from the mountain because the spirits make it too dangerous. All sorts of weird things have been seen and have happened on this mountain. Last night around 10:45 p.m., I heard 3 sets of sirens rush by the road. Out here, you never hear sirens, and in my cumulative 15 years here, I've heard 1 siren. It was earlier this week. Basically, it just intrigues me at that point. It wasn't about half an hour or so later, and the power cuts out. Already in bed at this point, lights were out. Only way I actually noticed was because I had no Wi-Fi. Now that's always a hard stopper, because out here no Wi-Fi means I'm entirely on my own. This makes me anxious for sure, but I'm more worried that I won't be able to call the fire department or something catches on fire or something. Then out of nowhere I hear this super sharp and loud cry, like a kid who has crashed on a bike. Hysterical crying from what sounds to be a young child. My dogs are going absolutely nuts at the door. Now, if you're familiar with cougars, you should know that they can often mimic a child crying, and scarily accurate too. So laying there as the tension builds, I'm just telling myself it's a cougar. That's all it is, just a cougar. For me, that's the best case scenario right now. That's just a cougar. Dogs have finally calmed down, and I'm still just trying to get some shut-eye when I hear the second sound. This was an ungodly sound that I've never heard in my life. This one sounded like a mix of every horror movie monster all in one. Can't even describe it. It's about 5 seconds of pure screeching, like a demonic banshee with vocal cords of a T-Rex. The bass to it shook my bed. It was as if there was a concert-sized sound system hiding in the forest, blasting zombie vomit. I can taste my heartbeat at this point. My dogs are acting like rabies-ridden pit bulls toward the door, snarling and growling like whatever just screamed was on the other side. I didn't know what to do at this point. Couldn't call or get in contact with anyone. The lights are all off. I'm just laying there in the dark, unerring and just completely scared. I wasn't about to give up and go investigate. It's the middle of winter, and I just laid there checking my phone every 30 seconds, seeing if the Wi-Fi comes back. Nothing else came after, though, just ended up falling asleep at some point. As of this morning, everything's back to normal. Nothing creepy going on, power's back on. I made a post on the local Facebook group. Nobody else in the area heard anything, and only a few lost power as well as me. So take it as you will. Cougar in heat, Bigfoot coming out of hibernation, 1,000-year-old native ghost trying to get me off his land. I'm not a very paranormal guy, and I have no idea what it could have been at this point. Some of my paranormal experiences. So our last house was a townhouse. I believe one family before us lived there. To my knowledge, no one died. But our neighbor in the house across from us passed away there. And we also lived walking distance from a cemetery. The way the house was laid out, it was 4 floors. Bottom floor is a basement, main floor was the living area, kitchen, then dining room. second floor was my bedroom, parents' bedroom, and laundry room. Top floor was like an attic and loft type space with walk-in closet, and that was my sister's room. Since my sister's room was the entire top floor, part of it was directly above my bedroom. This is your pretty standard paranormal thing, but whenever my sister was at work, I'd hear distinct footsteps from upstairs. I don't mean the house settling bullshit, but it was feet dragging across carpet, as if somebody refused to pick their feet up off the floor. The next one is when I was 9 or 10. I always wanted to sleep with my sister in her room despite having my own room myself. Eventually she got tired of me sleeping with her, so that night my parents made me sleep alone. I was lying in bed crying and upset. In the middle of me crying, directly in my ear, I hear shh. Now for this next one. I was sitting in bed on my laptop. My bedroom was perpendicular to the hallway. My door was open, and in my peripheral vision I saw what appeared to be a figure poke its head into my bedroom and then retreat. I looked up after this and called out for anyone, but no one was there. This one may be the scariest one, but this one is a little bit rational. I was asleep one early morning and was woken up to the sound of someone whisper screaming in my ear, "Wake up!" I felt as though I was being shook. This one may be written off as a half-sleep, half-awake hallucination, but it was still freaky. Forest Mimic Demon, Washington camping story. I've been an avid camper most of my life. More than that, I actually lived in the Wyoming wilderness for almost 2 years as a child in a house on a nature preserve. But it's a place where electricity was only available by generator, and we had to boil water that me and my siblings carried up from the creek. All of this was before I was even 10 years old. If there were emergencies, it would be at least an hour before we could go get help or help would come to us. I've hunted dangerous game. Not particularly proud of it, but it happened. Seen some weird shit in the desert. So when I say that I will not venture into the woods of the Cascadia Mountains, it's important to know that the wilderness doesn't frighten me easily. I was 23 years old when a friend of mine, we'll call him Darren, all names are altered, he invited me to a camping trip. The site was a place a few miles up the logging road, so about an hour-long hike from an already back road as fuck back road. It was just me, Darren, and his good friend Wade. The place was from the logging road about 10 minutes down a trail. The moment we got to the site, I was excited. The small lake was beautiful, barely touched by people over the years, and it comforted me somewhat. We got there, and within the last month, at least somebody else had camped out there, extra wood by the fire pit. We ate a bunch of chili and hot dogs, and about around dusk, guys went off into the woods and came back with a sealed bucket they had buried the year before. We opened it up, getting to some MREs that they stowed in the cache. It was looking like one of the better camping trips I'd had in my adult life. That night was a bit different. For the first time in my life, I felt an uneasiness sleeping in my tent. Couldn't quite place it. Chalked it up to not being used to camping without my dad. Darren brought his .38 Special for protection from predators, but he was the only one armed. The next day it rained, as it do in the PNW. We tried to wait it out, but eventually called it quits, packed up and went home. Fast forward to the next year, me and Darren get the itch to go camping again. I wanted to give that site another shot. I spent a great deal of effort convincing a bunch of my friends to tag along. In the end, I wound up being 6 of us, really, and a big white German shepherd. Me, Darren, Wade, James, Charles, and Rita, James's girlfriend, and Moogie, the dog. Knowing about the uneasiness, felt like last time, I brought my 12 gauge. James wanted to get some unregulated target practice in. Shooting shit they didn't really allow at official gun ranges, like full cans and gallon jugs. We also brought a quad with us this time so we could haul a bunch of extra water and booze and other supplies to make our weekend more comfortable. First day as we're setting up, we hear a loudspeaker playing some music over by the south end of the lake, which was basically right next to the logging road, and this you could sort of see from the road unlike the year prior. So, deciding we're big dick Americans, me and James saunter down to meet the source of the noise. Now, I have to commend the coolness of the cop that was just having a fishing trip when just two large armed men, me with the 12-gauge, James with his .308, emerged from the tree line. We introduced ourselves, mentioned the others, but not exactly where we were camping, just that it was nearby. That's when shit started to get creepy. It could have just been cops doing cop shit, but this guy really wanted to know exactly where we were going to be. Then he was mentioning his favorite spot nearby and really wanted us to try this other spot 2 more miles down the logging road. At the point, it was almost like he was suggesting that was the only spot where we wouldn't be in trouble. Darren showed up finally, told us that he spoke to the landowner several years ago and that they were fine with us being here. Cop was mad, but we lied and said we'd check out the site he was pushing. None of us trusted the guy when we left, so we decided not to. It was like a horror movie setup. The whole shady cop tells us to go to the spot where this hillbilly friend's gonna kidnap us, kind of hide. So we move on. Pretty early in the day, so we set up our stuff, get a fire going. Float around on a giant 4-person inflatable chairboat thing. Biggest highlight of the day, Charles cuts down an entire dead tree with nothing but a small axe, like a midway point between a hatchet and a fireman's axe. An impressive feat of stamina and strength. It was a good day leading into a good night, but right after it got dark, I felt uneasy again. The first thing that worried me was a couple of us heard something big splash into the far side of the lake. I thought maybe it was Mookie, but he was by the fire and his head now sort of perked up and looking in the direction of the splash. Since we were drunk, we thought maybe the floaty thing might have been compromised, so we went down with flashlights to pull it out of the water and onto the bank. Then we heard the owl. Charles, Wade, and Darren were already passed out by midnight. Rita was humming along by the fireplace with Mookie, and me and James were out getting some more wood so the fire would last. We heard an owl start up its hooting, a cadence I was familiar with in the area. But something was off about it. I have a gift for mimicking bird noises, so what I noticed immediately is the ending hoot was off. It almost always sounds like the owl is rolling its R's as the final hoot of the sequence goes. James, not nearly as outdoorsy as me, says, "That almost just sounds like a person." Joke and listen to it a couple more times, then I do my own attempt at an owl noise. Silence for a few minutes. Just as I'm thinking that makes sense because of the noise, it starts up again, but not just one owl. Another started up about half a second after the first. The new owl sounded more like an actual owl than the first one that seemed to have started up again. And after the first hoot from real owl, the fake one stopped short. "Did that owl just tell the other owl to shut up?" James says to me. I decide to shout, "Better listen to your wife, dude." Immediately after I shout, we both hear a loud crashing, almost identical to the sound of the tree falling that Charles did earlier that day. Moogie starts to go fucking berserk, barking and growling. He had a stink gland issue at this point still, so he was releasing that nastiness as well. Stink gland. He was threatened, and luckily Rita was there to keep him from bolting. Big, as he was really wanting to move. She wouldn't really be much of an obstacle. I'm about to shit my pants out of fear, and I will reiterate for a fact, I've hunted mountain lions and bears in my life, and at no point during those hunts was I shaken and genuinely afraid as this. I was paralyzed for like an entire minute. "Whoever that is, you better fuck off. We have plenty of guns." I shout that across the lake, then silence again. Luckily, for the rest of the night. I didn't fall asleep until Darren woke up, basically at sunrise, so I missed breakfast and a morning dunk in the lake, and the others all did before I got up needing to poo real bad. James had already explained the noise to the others by the time we were ready for a different adventure. Darren, Wade, and Rita just wanted to listen to the radio and chill. Moogie had run off after lunch, and we decided to go look for him, and at the same time also investigating the area of noises last night. Almost immediately when we get to the other side of the lake, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. Charles also feels creeped out, but he had an axe. I had a shotgun. James had his rifle and his .45 holstered on his hip. So we pressed onward, looking for probably a couple of hours. I was mainly trying to see if I could spot any trees that had fallen. Then we made it to the eastern bank of the lake. We were camped on the western side. "Holy shit," Charles says, causing me and James to come rushing over. There we saw what looked like a human footprint. Just one, but it was very clearly a footprint in the mud. Even had a little pool of water still in it. My first thought was Bigfoot, so I took off the boot and compared sizes. I'm a huge guy with pretty large feet, so it wasn't a surprise that my clodhoppers dwarfed this footprint when I put my own print next to it. But what was weird was the other print, where the pinky toe would be, looked like another big toe. We also found several downed trees, but none that looked recent, so we decided to go around north of the lake and back to the others doing a full circle. Moogie was fine. As soon as food smelled filled the air, he came running back. And we all had a pretty good day again. Drinking, feasting, making fun of each other, being paranoid. We heard some gunshots a little close, and then called out to warn the shooters that there were people and animals nearby. The shooters of us actually went to meet the people, and all of us but Darren and Wade joined the old guy and his wife shooting at whatever we could. Part of me consciously thought, anything that was lurking around sure as fuck isn't now. But boy was I wrong. Brief mention about Charles. Ever since we were kids, Charles had this vivid night terror. Most of the time funny, some of the time scary. He'd full-on sleepwalk and have conversations with you while still asleep. We'd all gone to bed. I was one of the first due to getting like 4 hours of sleep and being quite rum drunk. "Hey, who's that?" "Captain, stay in your tent." Charles, who was sleeping in a tarp by the fire instead of in the tent, started shouting. I shot up, grabbed the shotgun, and turned on my flashlight. "What's wrong?" I shout. Adrenaline filling my entire existence. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Come closer to the fire. No, don't crouch down, motherfucker. Use your words." He keeps shouting, finally stirring awake James and Rita, who were in the tent closest to Charles. "What the fuck?" James calls out. Moogie starts growling and apparently let off the stink gland again in their tent because him and Rita are like, "Ugh, moo, gross." "There's somebody sneaking up on Captain's tent. Get out here." I start to unzip my tent. "Not you, Captain. Stay in there. He's right next to you." Everybody else in these days denies hearing this, but I swear I heard something whisper "Captain" before hearing a twig crunch right outside my tent. James makes it out of his tent, and seconds later I hear him laughing. It's just the water stump. Charles is having a night terror. Charles claimed he wasn't dreaming. When I got out and shined a light on the stump, he agreed that that had to be it. We put one of those big jugs of water on top of the stump. It could easily be mistaken for a white shirt standing in the dark, and satisfied that there wasn't actually anyone there, despite my protests, we went back to bed. Charles stayed in the tent for the rest of the night. I decided to spend the rest of the night on watch. That was one of, if not the most terrifying nights of my life. I heard more activity in those woods than I'd ever heard before. Moogie would wake up and barf multiple times as I'd hear twigs snapping off in the trees. Then I heard a really big snap that had only been about 10 feet away. Jumped to my feet, whipped over where the noise was, and shined my light. I've seen enough deer ass in my life to know what if I could see it running. But it's not normal with deer. However, it's like they don't stand the fuck up and run on their back legs. Moogie howled and snarled. I took aim, letting my light drop, and fired. I didn't care that it turned to run. I fucking unloaded. Boom after boom after boom until I ran out of all 6 shells I had loaded. Everyone else was freaking the fuck out and rushed out of their tents. I told them what happened. Nobody went back to bed until the morning. Nothing else happened that night. I think Mookie refused to leave the tent and has now allowed others to take me seriously enough. He was a brave dog, sweet, but if mean dogs fucked with him at the park, he knew how to throw down. The last thing that happened on the last day, Darren and Wade are about to bury the bucket after pushing some fresh new supplies in it. They had always known where the cache was buried because there's a different stump that used to kind of, used as a landmark. That stump was just gone. It was there when we retrieved the cache 2 days prior, but now it just vanished. No signs of it being uprooted, dragged, or disturbed. It simply was as though it never existed. We all thought we made a mistake until we found the hole for the bucket still dug and the little poncho stuffed in it. Well, I'm never coming back here now, so we may as well take this with us. We all left after lunch. That's why I'll never go hiking in that Cascade wilderness without a firearm and at least 2 other people who know how to use them. I've been mourning the loss of my wife for 2 years. Back in the day when she was alive, we promised to haunt each other should one or the other leave this life. We both firmly believe in an afterlife and spirits, so this wasn't just a silly, joking promise, even if there was some teasing about how we would do it to each other. I actually think we only said it twice. Well, it had been 2 years since she had left. I recall being in the room she died in. The machines were breathing for her, and I felt her leave her body and just gone with the sound of the machine still going. A few hours later, they were officially turned off. Little back information. My late wife had an eating disorder, and this disorder destroyed a lot of her gut and organs. It was a slow, painful death. When I say I felt her leave, it was like a bullet-fast leave. In life, I didn't yell, never name call, rarely argued when we did. It was like a healthy discourse, and decisions were made to settle it. I knew her ED had caused these problems, but eating disorder. But what I didn't know was how much worse it really was. I found the information on her phone post-death. She knew death was the final outcome years before I knew, and held back the information from me, letting me talk about growing old together. In short, I haven't seen her. I need advice. I moved into this house with my boyfriend at the beginning of November, around the 4th of 2022. I've always had a weird feeling when I'd come visit as my boyfriend lived here with roommates before I moved in with him. Over time, my mental health started to take a downfall. For context, I've been diagnosed schizoaffective bipolar, diagnosed at 19. I've been medicated since. My symptoms are manageable, and I have coping skills that keep me grounded, and my meds help a lot too. I still struggle with social anxiety and some small delusions centered around that, but I can usually keep myself in reality and push those thoughts away, especially when I've been taking my meds regularly. When I first moved in, I was taking my meds regularly and only missed 1, maybe 2 days a month. I know I need to take them every day, but sometimes I just forget. And even before moving in, I lived alone for months without any sort of issue coming up. Almost immediately, I started having random bouts of anger, sadness, or panic-like anxiety, and all would leave me broken, crying. I started struggling to sleep, only getting 3 or 4 hours a night, if that. Eventually, I did run out of my meds, and because of this, sudden change in my mood and lack of sleep, I haven't had the energy to sit through another appointment. Which is where my problem comes in. For a while now, even on my meds, but not right after I moved in. Maybe for the past month, I've been feeling uneasy and not safe. Just general feelings of unease and anxiety. My boyfriend left to rehab for alcoholism treatment. Long story, he's getting the help he needs, and, well, I want to support him 100%, so please refrain from judgment. About a week ago and 4 days ago, I walked out of her bedroom to find the front door just standing wide open. Thought it was weird, and it did freak me out, but I looked around, didn't see anything, so I just figured maybe it was the wind or a vortex, maybe caused by me shutting the bedroom door after going to the bathroom. I don't know, anything logical. After that, I went about my day, and the sun went down. I started to feel this really heavy feeling in my room, like just an anxious, dreadful feeling that wouldn't go away, and it was almost like it was coming from the window on the other side of the room. Again, just tried to think logically and rationally as I do cope, and told myself I was just freaking myself out, being delusional or whatever, but just couldn't shake this feeling. It was overwhelming. Kept having to sit up in bed while trying to sleep to check if everything was actually standing there, and I never saw anything, but it just felt like it. There's a TV directly to the left of the window. I was feeling this coming from there, and at one point I opened my eyes after trying to sleep and I saw that the TV had turned itself on at some point. That freaked me out, but I tried to just ignore it and do my best to not acknowledge whatever was going on and pass it off as coincidence. And me being overly paranoid. But it's been days and I'm still just generally uneasy and unsafe feeling, which gets worse when the sun goes down. So much so I can't sleep until it's daylight again, and I still for only maybe 3 or 4 hours, sometimes less. Basically, the point of this ramble is that I'm being delusional, maybe? I know I need to get back on my meds, and I'm working on that, but do you think that the door being open and my TV turning on and the intense feeling could be something more? I'm going to leave for my mom's in the morning because it's getting to the point where it's too much and I'm overwhelmed. What can I do? Haunted Airbnb in Lower Appalachia. So what will be a year in March? My friends and I went to Chattanooga, Tennessee to celebrate my childhood best friend's marriage. It was a beautiful house on the Tennessee River, very private and a peaceful atmosphere. It was on a nature trail, so it felt very isolated, though it was close enough to the city for us to go out and have fun. Anyway, we had all had a great time in the city, and came back and started a fire in the fire pit. We hung out until we got all tired and eventually went to bed. We all decided to bunk in the same room that had 3 double bunks, 1 full bed. It was a large room, and we thought that we could all watch a movie together in there, but ended up all deciding we needed to sleep and drive and back the next day, really. As my friends are used to falling asleep early, and I'm not, so I was still wide awake. So I got on my phone and started scrolling. I know, bad habit, but I had no other options to reading a book or anything. So as I'm laying there, I get this feeling. And it's not a good feeling. I've had one paranormal experience before this, and it didn't make me feel scared. I just felt confused. This was different. Felt my hair stand up like a feeling of something with an ill intent was near me. I look up at the other bunks. My friends look fine. So I continue scrolling. Then I get the feeling again. I look up, and this time I look toward the full-size bed where the bride and her little niece who tagged along was. I see a dark figure, head bent, looking down at my niece. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. I kept thinking to myself, it's just a shadow from the stairway, like I'm in the room. I look down at my phone, and I get the courage to move my thumbs to text my boyfriend how scared I was. Which didn't help, considering he's not a believer in anything of that nature, so he just says you're just seeing things. After this, I look up and the figure's gone, which didn't make me feel better, only worse, because it only confirmed what I saw was not in fact a shadow. So I jumped from my bunk, bolted up the stairs, and crashed on the couch. I felt like a small child who just watched a horror movie. I kept hearing what sounded like creaking from the stairs. I thought of the old phrase, it's just the house settling, to calm myself. Then called my boyfriend and he talked me down. I thought he was probably right, but I was still shook up. Eventually fell asleep around 4 a.m. when the creaking stopped. Woke up around 6, got the courage to go downstairs to get into the bag of clothes. A few minutes later, the maid of honor comes up and she looks confused and kind of freaked out and then says, "Hey, did the bride come up here at all?" I said, "When?" Because I only slept 2 hours and I've been up since 6. She then says, "Oh, I mean about that time I thought I saw her up and go up the stairs." I said, "No, she didn't come up here." She says, "Well, I know, I saw someone go up the stairs." Her face was white, and I said, "Did you check the bed?" Then she goes back down and looks and says in confusion, "She's in bed." And so I just stood up in confusion and said, "Well, what time did you say you saw her again?" She said, "Well, only a couple of minutes ago. It's like 6:05. I said, "Maybe you just heard me. I've been up here since last night." She goes, "Well, I thought I saw someone standing between her suitcase and the bed over her knees." That's when my heart dropped. She knew I didn't have anything to say. She knew I saw it too. Needless to say, we were happy to get out and not investigate. Felt guilty, and I didn't stay downstairs with them to make sure that they were okay after she confirmed what I saw, however. I was convinced that it was just my anxiety, and my boyfriend being very skeptical made me think maybe I was just overreacting. But the look on my friend's face of pure confusion and fear confirmed him. I don't know if it's related, but a few months later, I learned one of the supposed most haunted places in Tennessee, Hale's Bar, is located just 2 miles on the river from this location. Also, there was this really old cabin from the 1800s. They had decorated for looks on the property. It definitely had some weird vibes to it, too. Didn't help that they had these old pictures inside of it of their owners. I wish I remembered the names so I could see if they had any correlation to the Hales Bar Marina. The visitation dream from a dad a week after he passed away. 4 years ago, my dad died from stage 4 melanoma. It had spread to multiple organs, including his brain. He was in the hospital for around 9 days, and 1 day in hospice before he died. When he was in the hospital before he massively declined and stopped talking, he was quite confused because of the tumors in his brain. He didn't know he was there because he was about to die. He thought he was there for treatment. One day I was alone with him and he went into a series of seizures. I stayed with him while the doctors worked on him. I talked to him between seizures. He seemed to recognize my voice. Afterwards, when he was awake again, he was saying how proud of me he was for working with the doctors on his treatment. He was telling my mom he was so proud of me too. At the time, I was dealing with a bad ED relapse, because it was the only way I could cope with what was happening. That included bulimia, which he never knew about. My dad was always proud of me, but I felt sad and ashamed that he wouldn't be if he knew how I was actually doing. Fast forward to after his death. Around 1 to 2 weeks later, I had a very vivid visitation dream. I was standing in my room, and I could see the details of my bedroom exactly how they were. Might as well have been awake with how vivid the dream was. My dad was healthy looking again and had a calm, peaceful energy to him. He told me he was okay, and he knew that we had been by his side when he died, and he heard everything we said. He said, "I know you're scared. I wouldn't be proud of you, but I still am. You were amazing, and I'll always be proud of you. I'm just sorry that you're going through this, and I want you to be happy." I told him again that I loved him, and I hoped he's okay, and he reassured me that he was. And then I woke up, already crying, but this amazing feeling of peace. It's hard to describe. Some people would say this was just a dream, but I know this was my dad's spirit visiting me. The vividness, the feeling I woke up, the sense of peace that was there. Him visiting me really did help me let go of the shame. I felt reassured that he was okay. Two stories I have questions about. First, I want to share that myself and my family have always believed in some kind of supernatural something. I'm 100% open to the possibility that all monsters we hear about are true. There has been far too many unexplained things in my life, personally. as well as life in general for people who think otherwise. I know a little bit about a little bit, but I have 2 stories that I'd like somebody who knows a little bit more to share what they think. Please ignore my grammar and spelling. I get it, I'm dumb. Don't worry. When I was a kid, between 10 and 12, my brother and I had a friend over. It was about 7 p.m. and my mom was at choir practice. We were the only people at home. We were playing in the living room when we saw my mother outside waving her keys that had a very specific Harley-Davidson leather strap on it. Through the window, playfully, like, yoo-hoo. We were confused because she left for practice a while ago. Didn't usually come home for another hour or so. We waited for her to come inside. That's when she didn't, we were scared. So I went to my brother's room and stayed there until my mom was home. We told her about it, and she swore it wasn't her and said that we were smart to not go outside looking for her. I've read things about skinwalkers and a couple of other theories, but I don't know. The next story is harder to explain. I wish I could draw, but a couple of years ago my ex picked me up from work around 11 p.m. We weren't even smoking, just kind of taking the long way home and chatting. We were coming up on an intersection with a car coming to a stop sign in the opposite direction. The car stopped short as this thing ran across the road. It was bluish but transparent, taller than the car. Had very weirdly bent back legs, the way a werewolf would be drawn, I guess. Very long arms, but running on all 4. The way it was shaped looked like it wasn't always on 4, like a dog. Maybe the best way to describe it would be like when you see those videos of people running around like a horse. Like butt in the air, feet flat, hands down, head down. But its body was not human-like. Its body was longer and dog-like. See, this is why I wish I could draw. None of this makes sense. The car filled up with tension as we both stopped talking when we saw it. We didn't say a word until we were out of that, intersection. I was like, I think, and she interrupted. I know. She kept driving until we were away from that area to talk about it. We described exactly the same thing to each other. First, we figured a werewolf, but I'm not sure. When I was a teenager, my friend and I would ride our bikes around town all night into the morning, and one day as we're heading home around 5 a.m. when we saw, I think, the same thing running alongside of us, very briefly before running into the woods. As a child, I shared my room with something. I, my 20s, female. I'll start with a little background. I grew up as an only child. My parents had my sister when I was 11. Before she was born, my dad rebuilt our bungalow into a huge 2-story house. Hence, no one died in my new bedroom. Now, onto my experiences. The ages are round estimates. I'm mid-20s now. When I was around 7, I started getting nightmares about the concept of death. I would wake in the middle of the night crying for weeks on end, and then it would stop for a while before starting again. By the age of about 10, this developed into a feeling of being watched, being unable to sleep, and being convinced something, not someone, something, was watching me from a specific corner of my room. My new room, the one my dad built, my dad eventually ripped that section of wall out to show me that there was a space there. I don't remember why, but there was a space all the way around the upstairs. He tried to turn it into a fun den area for me, but I hated it. Wouldn't go in there. And this continued when I was about 12. Got my first smartphone. The iPhone was my dad's old one, but it worked fine. That was until it got dark outside and the phone would start typing random letters and I was texting someone or typing. This only ever happened in my bedroom. As soon as I went down, it stopped. Told my dad, he said it must be damaged and he bought me a new one for my 13th birthday. He believes in ghosts, but couldn't explain what was happening in that room that he built. Then her phone did the same thing. I thought I was going mad. I bought some spell candles from a witchcraft museum when I went to holiday, and I was around 14. I used them to politely ask whoever or whatever was there to please leave the house peacefully. This worked, and I was perfectly okay in that room again. Slept fine. My phones were all fine as I upgraded and got the new ones. I moved out when I was 20. Went to visit my parents and stayed the night in my old room, and whatever was there when I was a child was back. Same corner, same feeling, same dark energy, same creature. Except now I have to imagine of it burnt into my memory despite never actually seeing it. It's a dark creature, has some type of human shape but very muscular. Crawls around on all fours, legs bent behind it, almost wolfish, without a snout. Snarls and glares, dark red eyes with big black pupils. It has horns as well, big horns curved back over its head. Some type of red tinge to it, but I can't identify where it comes from. There you go, that's my story. Believe me or don't, doesn't matter to me. But I don't go into that room anymore when I see my parents, not even in the daytime. All hell broke loose. I, a 23-year-old female, and my husband, male 23, recently moved in with some roommates. They are J, male 26, D, female 25, and their young daughter S. So we went from living in a decent-sized city to living in the middle of nowhere about an hour away. And for context, we live in the south of the U.S., so it's rural and woodsy nowhere. We're really good friends with our roommates, and husband and I knew beforehand that they had both experienced some paranormal goings-on before he really made the decision to move in. To be honest, I think husband and I forgot about all the paranormal stuff just before he moved. Everything was great when we were setting. Well, got along really well, and it was so amazing to be in a place where we had our own space and on equal grounds with our roomies. Then one night about a month later, husband Jay and I are lounging in the living room area just shooting the shit. S was asleep by her bedroom, as it was pretty late. We're talking about the paranormal. Around 11:30 p.m., Jay has to pick up D from work. She works the late shift about half an hour away from us. As Jay is getting ready to leave, he mentions skinwalkers. Now, husband and I don't use this word. For those of you who don't know, speaking aloud the word skinwalker or wendigo is often believed to attract these deadly creatures to you. Husband and I had strange and horrifying experiences the last place we lived, after one of us made the mistake of saying it out loud. So, no longer say it. Our code word for it is flesh pedestrian. If you're curious, as soon as Jay said it, I gasped. He laughed it off, but right before he left, he noticed something through the blinds on the back door of the house. He mentioned that he thinks there's someone in the backyard, and in truth, we don't really have a backyard. Back of the house is right up against the edge of the woods, but we do call it a backyard. Husband and I, thinking that he's fucking with us, laugh it off. Quickly, though, we can see from Jay's face that he's not. He rushed to look through the blinds, and sure as shit, there's something in the trees. It was incredibly hard to see, but it was very tall, very thin figure. It was darting quickly between the trees. Kept itself completely shrouded in the black shadows and couldn't make out any of the features. Jay rushes outside, thinking it's just someone on his property. Husband and I follow, not wanting him to be alone. I stay on the porch while husband rushes down the steps to follow Jay as he goes behind the house. The second he leaves my eyesight, Jay immediately turns around and shakes his head at husband. He tells us that as soon as he got to the edge of the trees, he heard a low voice tell him to turn around. Now, I come from a pagan background. My mother's Wiccan and husband's also pagan. As Jay leaves and husband and I finish our cigarettes, I immediately set out to bless the entire house with sacred oil and blessed salts. I had already done this as soon as we had unpacked the last of our things, but I felt it necessary to do it again. I went so far as to bless the entire porch, too. As husband and I are doing this, Jay texts me that he doesn't feel safe and something isn't right. When I ask him what he means, he writes that just a few miles up the road a naked man came charging out of the woods and stopped at the edge of the road. When he locked eyes with Jay, he simply pointed at the car, kept doing so until he was no longer visible in the rearview mirror. We tried to rationalize that it could just be one of this, a non-paranormal scenario. Thought it might just be a prank. That didn't quite make sense. It's the beginning of a very cold winter and it's about 20 degrees out. It would have been a lot of effort and discomfort for this man to pull a prank like this on passing drivers. Then me wondered if the man needed help, or was possibly in danger. But Jay was sure that this man didn't at all look like he was in distress. If he was, the man would have yelled or tried flagging the car down instead of just pointing at it. The conclusion we came to, for the time being, was that he was most likely on drugs. We don't live in the safest of places, and hard drugs are very common around here. Then Jay texted that he picked Dee up. More weird things were happening. I asked him to elaborate. He said he'd just explain it when they got home. As their cars pulled up into the driveway, husband and I went to meet them outside. But the two of them quickly got out of the car and rushed toward the house, telling us that we all needed to get inside immediately. When inside, Jay explained the night before that right before he got to Dee's place of work, he saw something in a cow field that he can't explain. It was tall, taller than any human possibly could be, and much taller than the thing that we'd already seen behind the house. From what he could tell in the dark, it was gray, and it was running faster than he was driving at 60 miles an hour on all fours. It ran into the woods and out of sight. When he was driving back before Jay could explain anything that had already happened, she got a sinking feeling in her gut and made Jay lock all the car doors. A literal second after Jay complied, the same creature had just been seen was once again sprinting alongside the car, much closer to the end of the road than it had been minutes before, but it dashed again into the trees before anybody could get a really good look at it. We were all a bit shook. It was now close to 1 a.m. and none of us could explain anything that had already happened. We tried to brush it all off. We probably could have if it was just one thing that had transpired instead of several. We make the awful decision to go back outside for a smoke. The kind of decision that only dumbass horror movie characters would make, I know. And then this is where shit got really weird. Off to our right, there's a small strip of woods that separate our property from our landlord's property where he lives with his daughter and son-in-law and granddaughters. In those trees, we noticed 3 sets of eyes. They were glowing yellow and green, and they're just staring at us. Husband asks Jay if he could be a deer, as we tend to see a lot of those around. But we all knew that whatever the eyes belonged to were far taller than any deer could be. Then to our left, there's more, you guessed it, woods. And from that direction in the pitch dark, I swear to fucking God, I heard a little girl laugh. It wasn't boisterous or loud, more like a snicker a child would make when they're trying to suppress their laughter. Dee and husband didn't hear it, but Jay did. Now we're looking at the big tree to our left that stands just before the edge of the woods and notice that there's a big black mass beside it, like something was crouched down next to the tree. We all try to rationalize that it's a big bundle of leaves, but I don't think any of us really believe that. Jay and husband both dart back inside for a moment, and when they come back out, Jay's holding a hatchet and husband's holding his crossbow. Without saying anything to Dee or I, they step off the porch and walk toward our left, where the little girl laughed. Later, they told us that they thought a child was in trouble. They wanted to help. While Dee and I are on the porch trying to figure out what the fuck is happening, we see something a few yards away down the driveway. It's like a huge tree in the middle of the property. Out of our peripherals, we could swear, kept seeing something duck from behind the tree. Keep looking at the tree, and yeah, there's something poking its head out from behind the trunk and sort of pulling back very quickly as soon as it realizes that we're staring at it. At this point, Dee and I want to go the fuck back inside. We're shivering from both fear and cold, and we just want the night to be over. But while Dee and I were in a match of paranormal peekaboo, husband and Jay had their own very weird experience. And for context, I have Tourette's syndrome. This means that I say and do things completely out of my control, and some of my verbal tics are just strange sounds. Some of those sounds include blowing raspberries or popping my lips, which are my 2 most common verbal tics at the moment. As Jay and husband are inching closer to the trees, they both hear footsteps through that grass, leave within the trees. Both of them were too frightened to call out to whoever they thought was in the woods, and then they hear shuffling. The problem is, though, that they each hear shuffling coming from different directions that the others don't hear. For clarity, Jay was walking on the left, husband on the right. Jay hears shuffling coming from the right and husband hears it on the left, but neither hears the same sound that the other's hearing. So they turn toward each other with their weapons drawn in their confusion while they're facing each other, and they hear someone running in the woods, full-on fucking sprinting through the trees. It was headed directly toward them. Then it just stops. Take a step back and watch to see if anybody comes out of the woods, and no one. Then they hear me in the woods right in front of them. I was standing on the porch behind them. They heard my ticks coming from the trees, my raspberries, and my lip pops from the woods. Without turning around, husband calls to me and asked if I had just had a tick. I told him nope. They back away from the woods without taking their eyes away from it until they're close enough to sprint into the house, pulling Dee and I with them. Inside, Dee and I are able to tell them about the thing behind the tree, and Jay and husband are able to tell us about something somehow mimicking my fucking ticks in the trees. For the rest of the night, we didn't go back outside. We would all, against our better judgment, peek through the blinds on the back doors when we passed it. There was still something in the woods every time that one of us looked. I didn't get any sleep. And come morning time, husband and I checked all the places that we'd seen or heard something, and there was no sign of anybody or anything. I asked my mother what she thought it might be. In her opinion, it was likely something related to a mimic spirit. A spirit that warps reality to feed on fear, but not having enough power to really hurt anyone. She said that it couldn't be a skinwalker because there's far too many things happening in too many different places all at once. Skinwalkers are solitary and territorial things, so it couldn't have been multiples of them. But just one mimic could do all these things we experienced. We still hear the occasional giggle in the dark, get a bang or a knock at the back door. We even kind of see these things behind a big tree in the driveway almost every night. But that night was something else. Never seen that shit in my life, but never have I gone through about 3 hours of nonstop activity. I've since burned sage all throughout the house and the entire perimeter of the property, as well as using the rest of my salt and oil around the entire house. Husband and I even did a late-night EVP session on all the spots shit happened that night. We didn't get a single response to any of our questions. I don't know for sure if it was a mimic spirit or if I can fully rule out skinwalker. I don't even know if the thing is dangerous or not. I'm certainly not. See ya.